That's just a costume. She's not military. Kids shouldn't wear things they don't understand. That's what the parents whispered. The students, they just laughed. They laughed at the little girl's tattered jacket, too big for her frame, too faded to matter, too different to respect. But what no one saw was the patch stitched right above her heart. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't pretend. It was earned by someone who never came home. And on Veterans Day, someone finally noticed. A 4-star general stopped mid-speech, walked toward her, and saluted, not out of pity, but out of respect. What followed stunned the entire town because the girl they had mocked was carrying a legacy too powerful to ignore. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where are you watching from. We love seeing our global family come together in the comments. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. In the quiet foothills of Blue Ridge, nestled between rusted barns and old family farms, lived a little girl named Charlotte Whitaker. At just 9 years old, Charlotte was a picture of gentle resilience, slim, soft-spoken, with amber eyes that seemed to carry generations of silence. Each morning, she walked the dirt road to Willow Springs Elementary, her small frame nearly swallowed by an old, tattered jacket, a faded military coat much too large for her. The sleeves bunched at her wrists, and the fabric hung past her knees, worn thin in places where time and weather had left their mark. But Charlotte wore it faithfully, every single day, even when the other kids laughed at the little girl's tattered jacket. To them, it looked like something from a thrift bin, outdated and strange, but to Charlotte, it was a shield. It had once belonged to her father, Sergeant Mason Whitaker, a man she barely remembered but honored in the quietest ways. Most never noticed the faint patch sewn above the heart, dulled from years of washing, its insignia almost invisible. But Charlotte knew it by heart. That patch meant something. She just didn't know how much until the day a general saw it and saluted. Charlotte had grown used to whispers. By the 3rd week of school, the giggles followed her like a shadow. She could feel the glances behind her back kids pointing at the little girl in the tattered jacket, whispering insults that never quite reached the ears of the teachers. Savannah Lee, the daughter of the town's councilman, was always the loudest. "What is that, some old army coat she pulled out of the dumpster?" she jeered one recess, flicking a finger toward the frayed sleeve. Her friends laughed, high-pitched and cruel. Charlotte didn't cry. She never did. Instead, she pulled the oversized jacket closer around her shoulders, her hands disappearing again into the long sleeves. That patch on the chest, the one nobody else noticed, kept her grounded. She didn't need their approval. She just needed to make it through the day. But the laughter escalated. It wasn't just about her coat anymore. It became about her. "She says her dad was in the army, but there's no record," one boy blurted out in the lunch line. "My uncle checked. She's probably lying. Some kind of stolen valor, or whatever they call it." The cafeteria seemed to freeze. Charlotte stood stiff, tray in hand, her cheeks burning. The patch had become a target. The jacket, once her armor, now felt like a billboard. That evening, Charlotte trudged home to the trailer she shared with her mother. As the sun dipped low over the rolling hills, her mom, Grace Whitaker, greeted her with a tired smile and warm cornbread. She could sense her daughter's weariness even before the words came. "They're saying things about the jacket," Charlotte murmured, eyes cast down. "They said Dad wasn't real, that it's all made up." Grace sat down across from her and reached for a worn shoebox from the top of the closet. Inside were papers, folded flags, and a photograph Sergeant Mason Whitaker in uniform, smiling with Charlotte perched on his shoulders, both bathed in golden light. "He was real, baby," Grace whispered, her voice shaking, "and he earned that patch." 2 days later, the Veterans Day Assembly was announced at school. No one expected anything extraordinary until whispers started that a 4-star general was flying in from Fort Bragg. The hall buzzed with speculation. Charlotte kept her head down, as always, but anxiety twisted in her stomach. Then came Friday morning. The gym was packed with parents, veterans, and community leaders. Rows of students fidgeted on cold metal bleachers. Charlotte sat quietly in her usual spot, jacket zipped tight, hands clenched in her lap. When General Raymond Holt stepped up to the microphone, the room hushed, decorated, dignified, and sharp in his uniform. He scanned the crowd, then paused. His eyes locked on Charlotte. He stepped down from the podium, slowly, purposefully. And then, to the shock of every soul in that gym, he stopped in front of the girl in the tattered jacket, looked at the patch, and saluted. Gasps rippled through the crowd, because he knew that patch, and he knew exactly whose jacket that was. The gymnasium fell into stunned silence. The image was almost surreal, a little girl in a tattered jacket, standing frozen in place, while a 4-star general saluted her like she was royalty. General Holt lowered his hand slowly. Then, in a voice firm and resonant, he said, "That patch on her chest belonged to a man I once served beside, a man who saved lives in ways most of you will never read about. That jacket is not just clothing, it is a legacy." He turned to Charlotte, his voice softening. "You're Sergeant Whitaker's daughter, aren't you?" Charlotte, stunned, managed a small nod. "Yes, sir." He smiled with a mix of reverence and sadness. I owed him my life. A collective gasp spread through the audience. Teachers who had once questioned Charlotte's silence, students who had laughed at her tattered jacket, and even Savannah sat stunned, unable to process what they had just heard. General Holt continued. Sergeant Mason Whitaker served in a special operations unit. He led a classified mission overseas in 2012. That mission turned into an ambush. I was part of the team. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him. He didn't make it back, but because of him, 12 of us did. He looked toward Principal Daniels. And until this morning, I had no idea his daughter was here, wearing that jacket with the faded patch, being mocked, being ignored. The general's voice deepened. Let me be very clear, this girl deserves honor, not ridicule. That insignia on her coat is not for show. It's a symbol of sacrifice. Charlotte blinked back tears. The jacket suddenly felt lighter, stronger. Mrs. Kendall, her teacher, covered her mouth with a trembling hand. The school custodian, a Vietnam veteran, wiped a tear from his cheek. Even Savannah, the ringleader of the teasing, turned pale and looked down at her shoes. Then General Holt did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This was meant for her family years ago. Bureaucracy. Secrets. They delayed it. But not anymore. He opened the box to reveal a Bronze Star medal with valor. This belongs to the Whitakers, and to Charlotte for carrying his memory with dignity. The gym erupted into a standing ovation. Parents clapped, veterans saluted, teachers cried. Charlotte stepped forward slowly, her little hands trembling as she accepted the medal. She didn't speak, not yet. She just clutched it to her chest, right over the faded patch, where it belonged. That morning, the little girl in the tattered jacket became the heart of the entire town. Not because she tried to prove herself, but because she never stopped honoring what mattered. She hadn't worn the jacket for attention. She wore it for her father. And now, finally, the world saw what she had known all along. For days after the assembly, the town buzzed with one name, Charlotte Whitaker. She no longer walked the halls of Willow Springs Elementary unnoticed. The little girl in the tattered jacket, once mocked and whispered about, was now the center of quiet awe. But the real shift didn't begin with applause. It began with silence, the kind that follows deep understanding. Even Savannah Lee, once so quick with cruel remarks, avoided Charlotte's eyes in the hallway. Her signature smirk was gone, replaced by awkward glances and a stiff posture. On Monday, she quietly moved from the front of the cafeteria to the back, her entourage fractured, their once confident laughter now muffled. Charlotte noticed, but she said nothing. Instead, she kept doing what she had always done, walking with quiet dignity, her tattered jacket draped over her shoulders, now bearing the Bronze Star medal inside its pocket, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Mrs. Kendall, her teacher, stopped her after class. "Charlotte," she said gently, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to apologize. I saw your strength every day, but I didn't understand the weight you were carrying." Charlotte tilted her head, unsure how to respond. "Thank you for teaching us," Mrs. Kendall whispered, blinking back tears. That night, Charlotte and her mother sat at their modest kitchen table, a candle flickering in a jelly jar. "Things feel different now," the girl said softly. Her mother, Grace, nodded. "People are finally seeing you. Honey, not just your jacket. You." "But it still hurts," Charlotte admitted. "They didn't believe me until a general saluted the patch." Grace reached across and took her daughter's hands. "Sometimes the world needs a louder voice before it listens. That doesn't make your quiet truth any less powerful." Across town, Principal Daniels called an emergency faculty meeting. "We failed her," he admitted, voice stern. "Charlotte endured months of ridicule under our watch. That ends now. From this moment forward, we lead with empathy and we protect every child who walks through these doors, no matter what they wear or where they come from." Posters went up around the school honoring military families. One featured Charlotte's father's photo smiling, in uniform with the words, "Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's stitched into a tattered jacket." Even Savannah's father, once dismissive of Grace and Charlotte's living situation, showed up at their door. He brought an envelope with a note. "Your husband saved lives. Let me help protect his legacy." Inside was a scholarship offer from the local Veterans Fund set up in Sergeant Whitaker's name. Charlotte didn't speak much in public, but her presence spoke volumes. Her classmates, once blind to the meaning behind that old coat, now leaned in to hear her soft-spoken answers. They asked questions. They listened. They learned. And though the jacket remained worn and weathered, it no longer looked ragged. Now, it looked like what it had always been. A badge of honor? 2 weeks after the Veterans Day assembly, Charlotte received a letter. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope with an embossed seal from Fort Bragg, addressed not just to her, but to Charlotte Whitaker, daughter of Sergeant Mason Whitaker. Her mother opened it with trembling hands. Inside was an invitation. "We would be honored to have Charlotte speak at the annual Children of Valor Luncheon. Her story has inspired not only our soldiers, but their families." Charlotte read it 3 times. "Speak." She was only 9. She wasn't like the girls who stood at microphones or led parades. She was the little girl in the tattered jacket, quiet and unsure until the general saw the patch and saluted. Her mother gently encouraged her. "You've already spoken, sweetheart. Every day you wore that coat and held your head high, you were telling the world who your father was." So they prepared. At the luncheon, held inside a grand military hall draped in flags, veterans sat alongside their families, some in dress blues, others in wheelchairs. All silent as Charlotte stepped onto the small stage, her jacket zipped tight, sleeves still too long. She looked out at the rows of men and women who had served. Some had tears in their eyes before she spoke a word. "My name is Charlotte," she began, her voice soft but steady. "You don't know me, but you knew my dad." She reached into her pocket and held up the Bronze Star medal. "He didn't get to wear this, but I get to carry it." Her voice caught. She paused, then continued. "They laughed at my jacket. They said it was old, dirty. Some even said I was pretending, but I wasn't pretending. I was remembering. I wear this because it's all I have left of him. It smells like him. And when I'm scared, I hold on to this patch." She touched the faded spot above her heart. That's where the general saw it, and he knew. From the back of the room, General Holt stood slowly. His presence brought the room to its feet in silent reverence. He nodded once, firmly, at Charlotte. She closed with, "Thank you for hearing me, and for hearing all the quiet kids out there who are holding on to someone they miss." After the event, a woman approached Colonel Amanda Reyes, head of the Military Family Support Network. "Charlotte," she said, "we're starting a new outreach program, one that teaches schools how to support military kids. Would you like to be our ambassador?" Charlotte blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Colonel Reyes smiled, "you help people understand the story behind the jacket before they laugh." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, "I'd like that." And with that, the little girl once laughed at stepped into a role no one had expected, but one she had been living all along. By spring, everything had changed for Charlotte Whitaker. Not in the flashy, overnight sensation kind of way, but in the quiet transformation of a girl who had once walked with her head down and now walked with quiet, steady pride. The tattered jacket still hung in her closet. It wasn't retired, but it was worn less frequently now. It had done its job. The patch, once invisible to others, had become a symbol recognized throughout the county, featured in local news stories, printed on brochures for military family awareness programs, even hand-sewn onto small flags by students who once mocked her. At Willow Springs Elementary, Charlotte now led the morning Pledge of Allegiance every Monday. She spoke clearly, confidently. Her classmates no longer saw her as the quiet girl in the weird coat. She was Charlotte, the one who reminded everyone what sacrifice looked like in real life. Even Savannah, the former queen bee, had changed. One afternoon, she approached Charlotte outside the school library. I saw the article in the paper," she mumbled. "The general, the speech, all of it." Charlotte looked at her, calm. "I was wrong," Savannah added, her voice cracking. "I didn't know." "I know," Charlotte replied, not cruelly, just plainly. Savannah glanced down. "Do you think, sometime, I could help with the next assembly?" Charlotte gave a small smile. "Sure, but we do it right this time." The moment marked more than an apology. It was a passing of understanding from ignorance to awareness. At home, Grace watched her daughter with quiet awe. She saw the difference in how Charlotte carried herself, how she helped younger students tie their shoelaces, or how she listened to others with the same patience she had wished someone would once show her. One afternoon, Charlotte sat down at the kitchen table with a spiral notebook and said, "Mom, I want to write a book one day. Not a big one, just stories about kids who feel invisible, like I used to." Grace swallowed hard and nodded. "I think a lot of kids would read that. They wouldn't feel so alone." That spring, Charlotte was invited to read to kindergarteners during Military Families Week. She chose a story about a young bird who kept a feather from its parent to remember them by. At the end, a little boy raised his hand and asked, "Was your daddy really a hero?" Charlotte paused. "He was," she said, "and not just because he wore a uniform, but because he protected people. And even though he's gone, I get to protect his story." The boy nodded. "That's brave." She smiled. Sometimes being brave is just wearing the jacket anyway. Charlotte had not just grown up. She had grown into something deeper, into the living, breathing embodiment of legacy. The little girl once laughed at had become a young leader. Not with a microphone or spotlight, but with a heart stitched full of purpose. And it all began with a tattered jacket, a faded patch, and a general's salute that finally let the world see what she had known all along. 6 months later, the tattered jacket no longer drew stares. It had been carefully placed in a glass case just inside the front doors of Willow Springs Elementary, under soft lighting, next to a folded American flag and a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Sergeant Mason Whitaker, and in honor of Charlotte Whitaker, who reminded us all that courage sometimes comes in quiet forms." Visitors often stopped in front of the case. Some would whisper, "That's the jacket," or "That's the little girl the general saluted." But Charlotte didn't need reminders. She carried her father's memory not on her shoulders anymore, but in her every step. The once invisible child had become a quiet force in her town. She had spoken at 5 schools, 3 veterans centers, and even appeared in a short segment on national television. But none of that had changed her. Charlotte still walked home past the same maple trees, still did her chores, still helped her mom clean up after dinner. One evening, while sitting on the porch swing with a cup of cocoa in hand, Charlotte turned to Grace and asked, "Do you think Dad would be proud?" Grace didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the stars. "Honey, I think he's watching you right now. And if he could salute you like that general did, he would, 100 times over." That night, Charlotte took out the patch now separated from the old coat and sewn into a small shadow box beside her bed. She traced its edges with her finger. The threads were rough, frayed, but they had held, just like she had. At school, the teasing had stopped entirely. Children now wore red, white, and blue ribbons during Veterans Week. Military families were invited to assemblies. Students wrote letters to deployed soldiers. And Charlotte. She helped lead the charge not for fame or recognition, but because she knew what it felt like to be forgotten. One student, Eli, a quiet boy from a Navy family, once whispered to her during recess, "I wear my brother's hoodie even though it's old. It still smells like him." Charlotte smiled softly and said, "Then wear it. Don't let anyone make you feel small for remembering someone big." The ripple effect of Charlotte's courage reached further than any adult had imagined. Not because she fought back, but because she stood still, stood tall, and never let them take away the meaning of that jacket. And when people asked, "What changed things?" the answer wasn't a speech. It wasn't the medal. It was the moment a general saw a little girl's tattered jacket, recognized the patch, and saluted. That gesture, simple but profound, shifted everything. It gave permission for others to see what was always there, a hero's legacy carried by the smallest shoulders. Charlotte never asked for attention. She simply refused to forget. And in doing so, she reminded a town and a nation what honor truly looks like. Willow Springs Elementary, the school where a quiet girl once walked invisible through the halls, now stood bathed in the golden hush of a late spring afternoon. The Veterans Day banners had come down. The chairs were folded. The final salute had long been given. But the sound of that moment when a general stopped, saw the tattered jacket, and saluted would echo far beyond gym walls. It began with a patch. It grew with a quiet courage. And it ended with a town that finally opened its eyes. In the space between laughter and reverence, a child didn't just honor her father's legacy. She changed the way a community sees service, sacrifice, and strength. Forever. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If this one touched your heart, the next will stay with you long after the credits roll. Tap to watch, and don't forget to subscribe.